All right. Good morning, everybody. We are starting to admit uh, our listeners for the session. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, I'll stall just about 20, 30 seconds here as we keep admitting our listeners. This is session 5 or 6 of the Winter Education Series. They've been going by fast. We've loved everybody's participation in it. Our guests have been great. You guys listening and asking questions have been great. Just a little lay of the land for those that have been in these before for the season. The rules are still the same, but for our new guys, we ask that you stay muted. It's probably cleaner if you even just keep your camera off. I know it gets a little distracting up in the top where you can see everybody's screen. So camera off, mic off. This is a very interactive presentation, as they all are. So our guest today is super happy to take questions. We type our questions in the chat, and then either myself or Jonathan finds the right time to ask them. Typically, I think within a minute of you typing them in, and we'll get them answered. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest today. I've got a little write up on him. So, we are welcoming Michael Keppen. So, Michael is a retired U.S. Navy commander with over 20 years of leadership experience as both a naval flight officer and a human resources officer. He amassed over 950 flight hours in the P3C Orion and flew 38 combat missions in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. For those that are curious, that is 950 more flight hours than me. He later led large-scale training and operations efforts across the Navy. Since his military career, Michael has entered corporate America as an executive focused on developing leaders and sales teams. He's known for his ability to turn vision into action and for building high-performing teams in complex, high-pressure environments. Sounds like golf courses. He holds degrees from Arizona State Arizona State University and Marquette University, along with multiple HR certifications. He recently started a brand new sales role at NOSCO right here in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. Michael currently lives in Antioch, Illinois. Pardon me if I messed up that pronunciation, but we're Wisconsin. We don't like Illinois. With his family and enjoys snowboarding, being outdoors, and golf, which obviously makes him especially excited for him to join us in the WPGA today. So, without further ado, Mr. Michael Keppen.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. And Derek, thanks for the warm introduction. Before we go any further, I do want you to use your chat window and type one word that describes the hardest part of leading people right now. Phones, time, personalities. Okay. I think those are all motivation, drive, dedication, and buy-in, setting clear expectations, time. All right, there's a theme here, and I'm glad that you've said these things because I think the framework and the model that I've developed for you will hit on a lot of these different things. But what I want you to do now is just sit with one fundamental question, which is really why we're here today and what I'm hoping to kind of get across to you. And that's, are people better because they work for you? By and large, that's the one question as a leader you should be asking yourself. Are people better because they work for you? Not just productive, not just compliant, but are they truly better? Are they more confident? Are they more capable at doing their job? Are they more professional in whatever setting it is, whether it's in the pro shop, if it's out on the course, if it's meeting with members in a boardroom? Are they better? And I'll tell you that this question became very real for me in 2020, and it shaped how I view and how I've practiced leadership, or how I've changed how I practice leadership ever since. So before we get into the framework or the model, I'm going to take you back to March of 2020 when I was responsible for the Navy's only boot camp, which is located just down the road in Great Lakes, Illinois. As a combat tested Navy commander, I found myself leading the largest training command in the armed forces. That's not only the Navy's only training site or boot camp, but it also is larger than any of the other services. The Army does acquire or assess more people into its service, but they have 9 different training sites. The Navy has one. And this was during the most disruptive leadership environment of my entire career. So to put things into perspective for you, between 40 and 50,000 young men and women recruits arrive to boot camp and graduate every single year. That's about 500 to 1,500 or more recruits every single week arrive and graduate. I had over 1,200 military and civilian staff that worked for me at the time. The actual number was 1,283. And we have 24-hour operations. No Christmases, no Easters, no July 4th. For my drill instructors, there's recruits on base right now doing something, and that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they've done that for decades. So no pause button, all the training going on all day long. Well, in 2020, as we all know, a global pandemic hit, and overnight we were left with a huge leadership challenge. So every week, like I said, all of those men and women were still coming to base. They were still showing up at our front door from all across the country, some of which were coming from across the world, where we have Department of Defense or Department of War bases overseas, and they were expatriates or children of expatriates that were immigrating back to the United States for their basic training. So all of these recruits were living in open bay barracks. They were training in close contact together. They were eating together. They were moving around and marching together, as you see the image on the screen. And each division of those recruits was about 88 to 100 recruits per division. Um, the big issue was the Navy was clear. My orders were, you will not shut down. So what we were facing wasn't a medical problem. It wasn't a health crisis. It was a leadership problem. There was fear. There was uncertainty. We had incomplete information. I felt like every day I was in a gunfight holding a knife. National security was at stake. Our lives were at stake in many ways. And all of those 1,200 plus people, including many more at the Pentagon, many more across the Navy, across the armed forces, our families, they were literally watching what we were doing every day. And they were watching for what we were going to do next. And they weren't just looking for answers, but they were really looking for leadership. So I'm going to ask you, who's watching you during your most difficult moment? Back to that original question, are people better for working for you? So think about all of the people that are working for you, or even in your life, in your personal life, in your family, in your circle of friends, like who's watching you during your most difficult moment? You may not run boot camps, you may not be in the military, some of you may be veterans, but right now you do lead in high expectation environments. And as I've said, to my friends and family and colleagues, regardless of industry, when you're a leader, you're in the people business. You run clubs, you lead professionals, you depend on seasonal teams, you manage performance, service standards, budgets with razor thin margins, and people. And a lot of the comments that, I asked you to type in initially had to do with, people, generations, people that use their phone and can't communicate. And I didn't see anything in the chat, but you also have to lead members, and those unruly members that are incessantly asking questions and why didn't I get this and what about that? All of those things come into place. And most often you do this with limited time and resources, as you mentioned. Time is a resource, and I know that it's very precious amongst all of you as PGA professionals, especially when the season kicks off. Bottom line, though, you wear a different uniform, but you have the same responsibility as leaders. So today's not going to be about leadership theory. I'm not here to theorize or to give you, some highfalutin thing that's hard to understand. I'm really going to talk to you about, in my opinion, what it takes to actually lead in a way that elevates the people around you. Because the real question about leadership isn't, are we getting results? It's, are people better because they work for us? And as I'll show you, leadership that elevates builds people, not just results. So again, if they're more confident, if they're more capable, if they're more professional because they work for you, then you're elevating your team, then you're leading. But if your folks are just compliant, if they're burned out, if they're disengaged, if you look at them as simply replaceable, you may be managing, but guys, you're not leading. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This is what I would say is the practical application of leadership in any environment, but certainly within the golf industry. Throughout my military career, even through those combat deployments, certainly during COVID, is that story that I explained. And even now in my time in corporate America, I've learned that leadership that elevates does these three things. It creates clarity, it builds connection, and it raises standards. And when any one of these three things is missing, like a three-legged stool, it fails. Your teams will stall and they will eventually fail. So we'll talk about each of these three things, in a little detail, give you some activities, but I'll show how each of these pillars drives a predictable outcome. And I said this is a practical thing. It's not a soft idea. It's not a theory. But when you put this framework into practice, it's going to help you foster success and elevate your team to succeed and to do things that you and them probably didn't even imagine. So, do I have any questions right now before I dive in?
Nothing yet in the chat. We'll give them 30 seconds, but I think you're in the clear to keep going. Very engaging so far. I think we're good to roll here.
Okay. So, our first pillar is clarity. And I would say that most leaders think when they've communicated, then when or they think that they've communicated when they've said something once, when they've communicated once. And I grew up in the South, and my parents would always say, Michael, I shouldn't have to tell you more than once to do that. When I was getting in trouble. Well, maybe it just didn't sink in, or maybe I was confused. But teams and the people that you lead uh, won't be successful if they're confused. But teams that have clear guidance, they will move with confidence and they'll often move forward independent of you and independent of others. But during COVID, like I mentioned, I didn't have perfect information. I didn't have hardly any information, but we didn't have time to wait. The first thing what I did was I had to stabilize the environment. I developed SOPs. I gave clear instructions on what we were going to do, and I had to define the priorities and establish what I called those non-negotiables, which I built guardrails, essentially those left and right limits, so that my teams could maneuver within that box without me telling them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. I didn't have time. Again, 1,283 people under my command, tens of thousands of recruits. I couldn't be everywhere and do all things all at the same time. So I had to develop all of those priorities in a pretty rigid way in order for them to just go and execute. But with that, I had to clarify my intent. In the military, we talk about this as commander's guidance or mission intent. I don't have to tell you everything to do, but I can give you the intent on what right looks like. So essentially, say you have an outside services guy and you have an SOP that says, I want the range set up in this way. I want the towels to look like this. I want the stands to look like that. You can tell them that one time, but make sure that you show them what right looks like so that every other time you don't even have to think about it. You know that they can execute on that standard because you've clarified what your intent is. So, like I did, I clarified my intent. I told my staff what mission success looks like, and I trusted them to execute. So, if your staff can't explain the standard, then you don't have a standard. So that's something that you can take back is just randomly ask somebody, what is the standard for this? And if they can't answer you, then that gives you an idea. You might need to clarify something. But clarity in general also does two things. It gives direction, which drives behavior, and then behavior becomes your culture. But culture is important, and your culture is your worst tolerated behavior. It's a pretty powerful statement. And I've been in multiple organizations that like to talk about how they have a really good culture. They have words on billboards on the interstate and they post things on their walls, but they really don't live it. It's lip service. And I've seen that though somebody says that they have a good culture, they still tolerate a lot of bullshit. So again, your culture is your worst tolerated behavior. Um, Go back into the chat, help me answer this question. So, and be honest, I would consider this a safe but brave space, if you will. So, what are some poor behaviors that you may have overlooked in the past as a leader? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, they're starting to
Okay.
flow in now here.
Okay. I got worried there for a second that maybe my mic dropped. Okay. Staff looking sloppy, shirts not tucked in, uniforms. And I get it, you don't wear a military uniform, but if you have, your business casual standard or you have shirts and stuff, yeah, you don't want them looking sloppy. Respect for one another and understanding the team element. There's a lot of individuals out there that don't understand that. Low care, less than perfect follow through. Okay. Inconsistent rules for employees. Sure. I've seen that where and especially in corporate America, it's the do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. So the rules for the CEO and the execs are different than, the entry level employees, or maybe, the level that I came in from the military into corporate America at. So it's inconsistency. So, all right, thank you for that. The second pillar is connection. This one, I would say, when I developed this lesson, is probably the one that I like to hang my hat on. I'm a big relationship guy. My mantra in general is work hard, build relationships, and serve others. And I developed that early on in my military career. Being that servant leadership has always just been something that I've gravitated towards. But most leaders confuse being busy or being present as leadership. And I will say that leadership presence will beat your leadership position anytime. Just because you have the title doesn't make you a leader. And I quit my last job because my boss, who had the title, was a very poor leader. I'll just leave it at that. But just because you have the position doesn't mean that you have the presence, if that makes sense. Um, and in many ways, I would say that this is what people in leadership roles struggle with. They either lack the emotional intelligence or that self-awareness as a leader to truly understand what it means to connect with somebody else. But emotional intelligence is a whole nother workshop that maybe we can get into later in another session. But if you're cold, if you're unapproachable, if you're an overbearing leader, if you're a micromanager, if you're impersonable, your staff, as you probably know, is not going to want to give you any extra effort, especially Gen Z and millennials. They will just not go that extra mile to do anything for you. Um, but when you connect with your team on a deeper level and you see each of them for who they are and not simply what they do, then it's going to build trust. And in my emotional intelligence training, think of yourself or somebody else as an iceberg. You know, the 10% that you see above the water line is only that 10% of that person. 90% of them that you can't see is there. So you look at that Gen Zer that shows up for a seasonal, caddy gig, and you're just looking at that young man or a woman as a caddy. But there's so much else to that person that you should be getting to know and being curious about who they are and what their background is and what their dreams and desires are. Because this is all about elevating them to become something better than they are currently. You can't do that if you don't connect with them. But that connection, like I said, builds trust. And as trust grows, so does your commitment. Commitment to one another, commitment to you as the leader, and ultimately commitment to the mission. And if you're a golf pro and you keep hearing mission, 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 think about, the framework or the core values that you stand on. You know, at Strawberry Creek and when I worked there for a few months, they had their core values. They had, company values, straw, and what that meant and what did it mean to be an employee at Strawberry Creek. And I'm sure that you have many of those types of values that you should impress upon those that work for you. Any questions about connection?
Commander, I do have a question for you.
Go ahead.
So, are you because you're speaking to a lot of different leveled guys here. So there are some directors of golf, there are some head pros, there are some first assistants. So
Okay.
each of them has different people who directly report to them. So a director of golf, very indirectly does the bag drop team report to them. They probably report to the first assistant who reports to the head pro who reports to the director of golf. Are
Yep.
you prioritizing connections? Are you saying, hey, as the director of golf, I've got four direct reports. I've got a head pro, a retail manager, or whatever. I need to they're my number one, and then I go down from there, and then I go down from there. Or are you, I think I know what you're saying. Is there a tiering to connection? Are you worried about one connection more than the other? Or are you trying to hit the whole board equally?
I would say, depending on the size of your staff, it's much harder to do when you have larger staffs. When I had 1,283 people working for me, I had a connection with each of those people, but I also had a core team. I had direct reports. I had four department heads. I had, senior enlisted advisors that were within my inner circle. They were like my brothers and sisters. So there was a chain of command. There was a hierarchy within the organization. Everybody knew who was in charge. I didn't have to go around and wear my rank on my shoulder and say, well, damn it, I told you to do this. I'm a commander. Just listen to what I say and don't ask questions. I didn't have to lead that way because I had connected with all of these people and they knew in some level that maybe I knew something about their family or I knew about something in their military career or I could see their uniform and I knew about enough about their job to know where they came from to appreciate what they were capable of doing. So I went that extra step with people that weren't in my inner circle and I still tried to connect with them. And what that also did is that helped my middle managers develop rapport with them. I wasn't jumping the chain of command in the opposite way. I was just leading with what I felt was the best way to see people for who they were, to make sure that I was approachable. And I did say that, yes, I have an open door policy, but it's also a managed door. I don't want you to take advantage of my time because you have a job to do just as much as I have a job to do. So I'm going to manage that time, but you're free to come in and chat. If you have a problem or something that I can help you with, excuse me, by all means, come in, but don't take advantage of that opportunity. Don't abuse it. But um, in the military or in corporate America, I've developed those relationships, at the highest level, or, just at the deck plate. And I think it's just something that if you're good at leadership, it doesn't matter that you just focus on the people that are, within an arm's length from you. But, it would go a long way if you have a first assistant or if you have seasonal teams and you take the time to get out of your office and walk around. And I get it, the time sucks, but leadership by walking around will win the day over an email.
Excellent. Very good. I seem to have had the only question on that topic, so let's keep going. That was awesome.
Cool. So I mentioned why I quit my job, which was my first job out of the military after only 18 months. And this is why. People don't quit jobs, they quit leaders. And I'm wondering, have any of you ever quit a job because of your boss? You can give me a thumbs up in the chat or respond. Of course. Thanks, Jason. So on the other side of that coin, think of the best leader that you've ever worked for. Man or woman, young or old, think about what did they do consistently? What were some of those behaviors that they expressed that made you want to emulate who they were? Type those in there as well. They held everyone to a standard. Thanks, Jason. They taught life lessons. And Dave, with life lessons, that was their ability to connect because I believe, I believe that same way. I've learned more through some of my leaders' life lessons because it almost gives them street cred. Like they've been there, they've done that, and now they're willing to help teach and train the younger guys and help us grow. They appreciated honesty above everything. Cool. Yeah, if you're not an honest leader, and you're just faking it till you make it, people will see through that pretty quickly. All right. Thanks, guys. So the last one is challenge. I've seen a lot of leaders, even the VPs that I consulted with in my first career or my first job after my military career, really struggle with this. I felt that they waited way too long to challenge someone because they didn't want to be the bad guy. They wanted to be nice in the sandbox. Everybody get along, kumbaya. And that's great and that has a purpose. But if you and your first assistant or your whomever, like the person that reports directly to you, if you're doing this good cop, bad cop thing, it's not going to work. Just like, I said with, being an untrustworthy leader, someone who, doesn't do what they say they're going to do, they're going to just look right through that. So it's not going to cut it essentially. But often, our best work comes when we're challenged or we're under pressure. And I would say that my career in the military was certainly challenging. Um, I was under a lot of pressure, especially during COVID, but I had to empathize with my troop situation. We were all stuck on living on base indefinitely. We had no idea when we were going to be able to go home. March 26th of 2020, we got the order to report to base, and there wasn't a time limit put on that. So imagine living 20 to 30 minutes, or maybe even less if you lived in and around base. Imagine living that close to your family and not being allowed to see them for an indefinite amount of time. Literally, it was a deployment. We deployed to base and we were stuck there for what ended up being 5 months for me, living on base for 5 months in this area without the ability to leave or see my family. So certainly a challenging situation. Um, Certainly the toll on the mental and physical aspects of myself and my staff was challenging. It was insurmountable at times, but I still held the bar. I held the line. I knew that our quality, based on what our orders were, what our standards were, couldn't slip. And I really impressed that upon my staff that we were doing something that was new, it was unique, it was hard and arduous, but we couldn't allow ourselves to let quality slip because we were tired or we just didn't care or we just didn't know. So I held them accountable. They were accountable to number one, their oath. When you raise your right hand and you swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution and the country whose course it directs, that's a powerful oath. You are willing to give your life in defense of the freedoms that that Constitution says. And I know that nobody's telling you to give of your life in defense of, an 18-hole, par 72 course, but you get my point. They were accountable and they remained accountable to the mission, to each other, and to the orders that they were given. I just like I was being held accountable to the orders that I was given. But when you challenge people, you give them that opportunity to grow. And as I'm sure you've heard, growth happens outside of your comfort zone, but challenge leads to growth, and growth elevates someone to achieve something that they never could have imagined. You have any questions on challenge, holding the line, maintaining standards? Any questions out there? Okay.
Still looks good. No questions. Keep her rocking.
So think about this. Comfort maintains, challenge develops. Remaining comfortable just simply maintains that status quo. But the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. And I would say this every time I walked into a barracks or I walked down the line and what we call troop the line, if something was out of spec, if something wasn't up to standard and I just walked past it, by virtue of me not saying anything as the leader, that meant to everybody that was watching me that, well, Commander I guess he accepts it then. He didn't say anything about it, so it's acceptable. So ask yourself, where have you been protecting comfort because you're tired or you're too busy or you just simply don't want to deal with it? So if you want to elevate your team this year in 2026, you want to reach new heights, at a leadership level, at a team level, at an organizational level, you need to challenge your people. You need to give them an opportunity to grow, and you need to hold them accountable to that standard that you've set. So we're going to do a short exercise. This is where I want you to just think for 3 to 5 minutes about these questions. We walk through clarity, connection, and challenge, but I want you to personalize it. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. You can go off camera if you want. This is strictly for you. I don't need you to share it. You can call me later and we can talk about it and I can coach you through whatever specific issue or challenge that you may be facing. Um, but as I've said to my teams, corporate America or the military, if you change nothing in the next 30 days, nothing changes. So that's why I want you to actually take some time that we've dedicated now and actually do this. So take out a piece of paper, take out your phone, take out a note, answer where is my leadership helping my team, i.e., where are you strongest as a leader, and where are you quietly holding them back? Or where is my team paying the price for my gap in leadership? So this is like a strengths and weaknesses thing, but where are you holding them back and where are you strongest? So I'm gonna put my timer on for 3 minutes. And if you want to go off camera, like I said, feel free. We can monitor the chat, but you got 3 minutes. Got about 2 minutes left. About 1 minute left. All right. I think most of you are probably done by now. But I really wanted to take that 3 minutes. It seems like a long time when you're just sitting there thinking in your head, but sometimes we don't take the time that we need to really invest in ourselves and question what we are and who we are as leaders and how we can improve. So, hope you took advantage of that opportunity. So as we start to wrap up, you might be wondering what were the results of my team's efforts and my efforts at the Navy's boot camp during COVID. And I've kind of woven this story throughout, the different pillars that we talked about. But in the end, in general, the Navy set the standard for every other service to emulate. And many of those efforts that we put into place in 2020 are still evident and still going on 6 years later. So with the numbers, most importantly, zero people died, zero people became seriously ill due to COVID. Yes, there were plenty of, symptomatic or COVID positives, but what we changed drill halls into quarantine facilities and hospitals, and we were able to provide them round-the-clock medical care and constant medical attention. So nobody got seriously ill, nobody died. That was the biggest thing that we could hang our hat on. Um, and the Navy may had slowed its supply chain as opposed to getting, those 500 to 1,500 recruits every single week. We might have dialed that down a little bit to catch our bearings and maybe take a knee and just figure everything out. But we were the one and only service never to shut its doors, never to shut its supply chain, never to shut down its basic training site. Every other service, Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, they all shut down. But we were the only service that got the order to remain open. And I think that's because of our leadership between me and the president. The leadership was all aligned on what we were willing and capable of doing during COVID to still train in a bubble, essentially, in a healthy environment. Lastly, the strategic planning that my team and I did during COVID allowed us to extend boot camp from 8 weeks to 10 weeks. And that might not be a big deal to a lot of people, but when you imagine the dollar value behind that, it cost me $188 per day per recruit to train. So we took advantage of that 14-day quarantine period and tack that on to the end of boot camp, which gave the Navy the opportunity to do more training in a single site with the same standardization, the same learning objectives before just sending these young men and women off to the fleet to get those trainings done in probably different ways. It might have been the same topic, the same job, but it's done in different locations by different people. So we capitalized on that opportunity to standardize training in one site. And there was a moment during COVID before we were figuring this out that I had 11 hotels that I was renting in Gurnee, Illinois to the tune of $37 million a month. And what we ended up doing was we couldn't pay that bill. Big Navy choked on that bill. So we moved everybody up to Fort McCoy. And I'm sure many of you know where Fort McCoy is and have probably been there. We had all of those recruits bust from Chicago O'Hare to the base and then up to Fort McCoy, where they would spend those 14 days to quarantine before we would bus them all the way back down to Great Lakes, where they would start training. So we took that 14-day period, put it into our basic military training schedule, and now the Navy has a better training program because of what we did during COVID. And lastly, the 20 is 20,000 recruits transferred to the fleet to their follow-on training during those first few months during COVID, based on all of those sacrifices that my team and I went through and all of the things that we did to really keep national security, up there. That was our focus, and to keep that supply chain moving. So if we can do all of that, I think leadership in general on a golf course in a golf setting in the golf industry is something that you can do. You just kind of have to think outside of the box in some ways, and pull your team together in order to accomplish that. So one of the biggest things I learned throughout my career, and I think I said this in the beginning of a presentation, that regardless of industry, when you're in a leadership position, you're in the people business. But great leaders influence by understanding, um, not by authority. So I grew up in the military under this motto, mission first, people always. But when I reached the pinnacle of my career and I finally had what I felt was the ability to truly impact change and impact culture, um, like some of you that are directors of golf or GMs, like you may be in that position in your organization to really affect change. um, what I did was I changed these two words around: people first to mission always. And this was a simple, subtle change. I mean, it's just flipping two words around. But what that did for my teams was they truly felt like I was putting them first. And when I gave them the tools, the time, the resources, when they felt like I gave a shit about them and what they were, who they were, not what they were doing, they ran through that proverbial brick wall for me every time. So when you think about this, people first, mission always, when you put your people first, the mission will always get done, period. But the other way we said it, mission first, people always, people were second to the mission. Their families, their sacrifices, their needs, they were always second. So going forward, I challenge you in 2026 to put your people first and to think about them, whether it's mentally or literally putting them first and really investing in them and elevating them to the point where they can do the mission and get it done always without you even being there. Any questions on that? Okay. I've received a lot of commendations in my career, and certainly for the efforts that we had during COVID. But one of the most important things and what I'm most proud of is all of the awards that have my people's names on them. Um, I was the Officer of the Year for the Navy in 2014, but Dan Walker and Jessica Hall, two of my proteges, were the Officer of the Year in 2015 and then in 2020. I cared more about Dan and Jess getting those awards than feeling that pat on the back and the medal on my chest for when I got the award. And this is about legacy. So when you think about your leadership impact and your leadership legacy, think about this: the success that matters most will outlive you. So, what example are you setting that you wish others would emulate? Think about that exercise at the beginning of this presentation when I asked you about, did you ever quit a boss, and what did those behaviors for the person that you enjoyed working with look like? Think about now you're that person for your teams, and what are you going to do? What are those behaviors that you're expressing that you want others to emulate? Ultimately, your success, if you do that, will outlive you. So, in closing, remember that every person who works for you is quietly answering that one question: does working here make me better? Like I said, you don't just run clubs, you shape confidence. You shape careers, you shape standards, and leadership that elevates doesn't just happen automatically. You have to apply it. You've got to get out of your office. And I know time is precious, but doing leadership through email is just not going to cut it. It's going to happen in conversations. It's going to happen in consistency by showing up. It's going to happen in what you tolerate. Again, walking past that standard and not saying anything still says something about you as a leader and what you're willing to accept or not accept. And leadership's going to happen in what you model. So don't just build good seasons, build people and people who are better because they worked for you. Because at the end of the day, when you do that, that's what leadership that elevates really looks like. So, ladies, gents, that's all I got for you today. Jonathan, Derek, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I love golf, like Derek had mentioned in my bio. I think that there is certainly a spiritual component to it. There's a camaraderie component to it. I really love the game. I appreciate what you guys do. Please stay connected. I'll type my info in the chat. Reach out to me if you have a personal question or a situation you're dealing with. I'd love to coach you through it. And when the season gets better and we don't have snow on the ground and you open up, I'd love to come and visit and see you in person. So, Derek, John, that's all I got.
Commander Keppen, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Um, just starting a new job, so taking the time away and giving us a little bit of your knowledge was super appreciative. So thank you. We'll see if there's any questions that come through the chat, which I'm sure you can see. So if there's any questions, but I'll just plug it for our next seminar next Tuesday, golf instruction using AI with Sportsbox AI. So you'll see that link coming out from Chris coming up soon. So thanks again. And again, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes looking for questions. If there's nothing, then we'll end early and give you back 10 minutes of your day. So thank you, everyone.
Jonathan, Jeremy had a question. He just read the book No Ego and was wondering if I could share thoughts on managing one's ego, including my own. So, I've been trained to deliver emotional intelligence courses. I think, well, let me start with a joke. How do you know when a naval aviator walks into a bar? Well, he announces himself. So there's naturally an ego that comes with being in the Navy aviation community, whether you're flying fighter pilot or fighter jets or the plane that I flew, the P3. There's just an arrogance that comes with being, in the community. So as you age and you gain more wisdom and tenure, you start to learn really what's important about life. And that's, through leadership and taking care of your people, but really establishing your level of emotional intelligence. It's a skill. It's not something that you learn and then just, like riding a bike, it comes naturally. It's something that you have to practice. It's like flexing that muscle, going to the gym, and working out, and you can't atrophy. But part of emotional intelligence, the first thing is that self-assessment. Do you know how you show up when other people are in the room? And if you don't, then you probably need to do a better job at assessing who you are as a person, as a leader. But the second part to that is, are you able to manage yourself throughout those situations? Are you able to, you know, check yourself? And for me, especially during that example I gave during COVID, I didn't have to walk around with my rank on my shoulders and use my position of power and authority to get people. Oftentimes I had the answer, but I wanted my teams to develop their answer because it could have been a better way. And quite often, the best answer in the room came from the youngest person. And that was humbling for myself and for a lot of the other leaders that we thought we had all of our stuff together. And we had this, young petty officer stand up and said, "Sir, why don't we do it like this?" And no ego aside, it was just like great, and then you recognize excellence when it's in front of you. Um, so I would say that ego in general, ego can be good, but typically it's defined as, hey, this is bad because it's an arrogance, it's an overconfidence type of thing. But um, when you think about it in the context of improving culture, um, I would say take the rank and position out of it. Look at yourself as someone that's lateral to everyone else in the organization. This is just your mentality. I'm here to do as best as I can on behalf of my employees and on behalf of this organization. And I will do whatever it takes to help them succeed because I know when I do that, they're going to help me succeed. And it's one team, one fight at the end of the day. So I hope that helps, Jeremy.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any further questions, so
All
we're going
right.
to go ahead and end the meeting. Thanks again, Commander Keppen. I look forward to seeing you here soon, and thanks again for everyone for being on the call. Thank you.